You are hereby fined $50,000 for an unsightly. President slid into my mailbox on a Tuesday in May. The mill has run on this property for 153 years. The fine was a fabrication. Lucinda Marbury wanted the dam gone, so her husband's development company could build 30 luxury homes on the dewatered pond bed. So I did what she asked. I filed the proper Vermont stream alteration permit. I removed the dam legally over 3 days. Then, a 25-year storm event dumped 5 inches of rain on the Lemoy watershed. In July 23rd, Maple Brook Reserve homes flooded that night. The dam she had demanded I remove was the only thing that had been protecting them. Tell me below, would you have fought the fine in court or filed the permit? The Withington Place sits on the south bank of Beaver Branch in northern Lamoille County, Vermont, 12 miles east of the village of Hyde Park. On a town road that has been called Withington Mill Road since 1884, 180 acres of mixed northern hardwood, sugar maple beech, yellow birch hemlock, running from the high ground above the mill pond down to the alder swamp, where the branch meets the lower Lamoille tributary. The center of the property is a 14-foot earthen dam my great-grandfather Josiah Whitington built in 1872 to power a grist mill he ran commercially until 1958. The mill still runs. I rebuilt it between 1990 and 2005 with my own hands. And I run it every Saturday from May through October as a heritage demonstration site for the Vermont Historical Society. My great-great-grandfather bought the original parcel in 1804 with the savings from 6 years of carriage building in Brattleboro. The deed has been in the family for 221 years. I'm Beckett Withington. I'm 64. I worked 30 years as a master millwright, restoring water-powered mills across New England, grist mills, sawmills, woolen mills, and the occasional fulling mill. I sat on the Vermont Historical Society's Preservation Board. From 2008 to 2022, I drafted the state's millwright apprenticeship curriculum. In 2014, I retired from active restoration work in 2022. Though I still consult on 3 or 4 projects a year for the New England Mill Preservation Alliance. My first wife, May, passed in November of 1996 from ovarian cancer. She was 36, our son Tarquin was 8 years old. I raised him alone in the mill house for the next 22 years. In 2016, I married Neve, who was widowed in 2010 when her husband, Declan, succumbed to multiple sclerosis after a long fight. Neve ran the Vermont Maple Sugarmakers Association for 28 years and retired the same year I did. She is 57. She makes our maple syrup every March on a wood-fired evaporator. Her late father built in 1962. She wears a wool barn coat that belonged to her grandfather and a pair of leather work gloves she got for her birthday in 1989. Tarquin is now 36. He is an artisan blacksmith. He lives in the converted carriage house at the back of the property and forges replacement parts for working mills across New England. Gears, pinions, Pintel's Watergate Hardware. He has May's eyes and my hands. Neve's daughter Eva is 28, lives in Boston and works as an associate at a Beacon Hill law firm. She visits at Thanksgiving and on the second Saturday of every August for sugar on snow at the mill. In the spring of 2019, a developer named Quentin Marbury broke ground on a luxury subdivision called Maple Brook Reserve. At Lamoille Falls, the development sits on a 63-acre parcel, 3/4 of a mile downstream from our dam, on the south side of the lower Lemoyne tributary, where it widens into a slower-moving pool. 80 homes, brick fronts. White columns, a community, a dock at the bottom of the development. Quentin Marbury's wife, Lucinda, took over the Maple Brook Reserve HOA presidency the day Phase 1 handed over to the residents in 2020. She drove a pearl-white Range Rover Velar with a Maple Brook Reserve sticker on the rear window and a vanity plate that said, Lucinda M. She introduced herself to me in the summer of 2020 by way of a polite letter suggesting we coordinate stream management. Between our properties, I wrote her a polite letter back, saying my dam had been managing the stream since 1872 and required no coordination. That was the last polite letter I received from Lucinda Marbury. The first formal complaint from the Maple Brook Reserve HOA arrived in October of 2021. It was titled Notice of Adjacent Watershed Management Concern. It cited my mill pond's water level as fluctuating in a manner inconsistent with downstream community aesthetic expectations. It requested that I coordinate with the HOA board to maintain a consistent, visual pond elevation through the summer months. I read it twice. The water level in a Vermont mill pond fluctuates by design. The dam has a stepped sluice gate that releases water at controlled rates to feed the mill wheel when it is operating and to maintain healthy summer flow when it is not. The level varies by 8 to 14 inches over the course of any given summer, depending on rainfall, evaporation, and how many tours I am running through the mill. I wrote Lucinda Marbury a polite letter back, explaining the basic hydraulics of a Vermont grist mill operation. She did not reply. What I received the following March was a second letter. This one was on Maple Brook Reserve HOA letterhead. It demanded that I voluntarily lower my mill pond by 30 inches. In the interest of maintaining downstream view corridors and reducing visual stagnation at the upper edge of community property, the HOA had no jurisdiction over my dam, my pond, or my mill. The HOA had no easement, no contract, and no Vermont statutory authority of any kind to demand that I lower water levels on my own land. The letter was in every meaningful sense a fiction. I declined the request in June of 2022. The Maple Brook Reserve HOA newsletter ran a piece titled, "Adjacent Watershed Tensions." A note from your board, it described in a soft, cursive font. A longtime adjacent landowner, whose continued refusal to coordinate watershed management has created uncertainty about the visual integrity of the community's lower meadow corridor. It did not name me. It didn't have to. By the end of 2022, 3 Maple Brook Reserve residents had taken to driving past the foot of my driveway in their boats that they would launch at the community kayak dock and pull upstream until they bumped against the spillway of my dam. Each of them would photograph the dam, photograph the pond, photograph the mill, and drive home. None of them spoke to me in April of 2023. The first formal HOA fine arrived in my mailbox. It was a citation for unauthorized obstruction of community waterway access, assessed at $5,000, under what the HOA's board claimed was Vermont, Title 24, Chapter 113, Section 419, which is a real section of Vermont statute that addresses municipal nuisance ordinances and has no application to private dams or private mills. I drove down the road to my attorney, Cormac Toombley's office in Moortown. Cormac is 68. He grew up in Lamoille County. His father was a county sheriff in the 1970s. Cormac has been practicing Vermont property and water law for 43 years and has the kind of quiet, dry humor that defines a certain kind of Vermont attorney who has read every section of Title 24 at least 3 times. He read the citation. He laughed for 9 seconds. He said, "Beckett, they're trying to scare you. Don't pay it. Don't respond to it. Let them try to enforce it. They cannot." I followed his advice. In November of 2023, a second fine arrived. Citation for watershed nuisance creation at $10,000. Same fictitious statutory citation. Same non-existent authority. In February of 2024, a third fine. Citation for obstinate refusal to coordinate community standards. At $15,000 in April of 2024. Lucinda Marbury herself drove up the Withington Mill Road in her Range Rover and parked at the foot of my driveway. She did not come up. She sat in her vehicle for 35 minutes. She filmed the mill, the pond, and the dam with her iPhone. Neve watched her from the kitchen window with a cup of black coffee. Neve did not say anything. She walked to the wood stove. She added 1 stick of yellow birch. She walked back to the window. She said, "Beckett, that woman wants something she has no right to." I told her I knew 3 weeks later. The fourth fine arrived, the largest yet. A consolidated administrative penalty assessed at $50,000, formally noticed for filing as a property line with the Lemoyne County Clerk, if not paid within 30 days. The letter was signed by Lucinda Marbury, President Maple Brook Reserve HOA. I read it standing in the millhouse kitchen, with the back door open and the sound of the dam spillway running steadily across the yard. I called Cormac Twombly. I said, "Cormac, they're filing a lien." He said, "Beckett." Now we get strategic. Cormac Twombly drove out to the Withington place. The next morning at 9, he brought a thermos of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the kind of leather portfolio I had not seen open since 1998. He sat at the kitchen table with Neve and me. He drank 1 cup of coffee. He listened to me read all 4 fines aloud in order. When I finished, he said one sentence. "Beckett, you are not the target of these fines." "The dam is the target. They want it gone." I asked him why he drove me into Morristown that afternoon. We sat in the second floor, records room of the Lemoyne County Clerk's office. For 4 hours, Cormac knew exactly where to look. He had over 43 years of practice, developed a particular relationship with the deeds, Planning Commission records, and Vermont Agency of Natural Resources stream alteration files for the Lamoille watershed. He pulled the original 2018 development permit application for Maplebrook Reserve at Lemuel Falls. Maplebrook Reserve LLC principal Quentin Marbury had filed the original permit application with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, Watershed Management Division on March 14th of 2018. The application required a flood hydrology study under Vermont Stream Alteration Rule 4.0 because the development was located within a 100-year regulatory floodplain along the lower Lemoille tributary. Hydrology study was attached as Exhibit B to the permit application. The hydrology study had been prepared by a firm called Northeast Floodplain Consulting, based out of Manchester, New Hampshire. The study modeled the lower Lemoille tributary discharge characteristics under various storm return intervals. The study concluded that the development site was protected from 100-year flood inundation by permanent upstream impoundment structures, providing approximately 11 hours of peak flow attenuation. The permanent upstream impoundment structures were, in the language of the study, the Withington Mill Pond Dam, 1872, Lamoille County. Vermont Dam Inventory number LM-1872-14 classified low hazard by Vermont A&R Dam Safety Program. My dam, Quentin Marbury, had filed a flood hydrology study in 2018 that explicitly relied on my dam to protect his development from 100-year flooding. The A&R permit had been issued on that basis. 80 homes had been built on that basis. 80 Vermont families had moved into the lower Lamoille flood corridor on the basis of a hydrology study that assumed my dam would remain in place. Now Quentin's wife was filing $50,000 fines, demanding I remove the dam. Cormac set down his reading glasses on the records table. He said, "Beckett, either Quentin doesn't know what's in his own permit, or he does and he's gambling." I asked Cormac what Quentin would have to gain. Cormac pulled a second set of records. Maplebrook Reserve LLC had filed a preliminary Phase 2 development plan with the Lemoille County Planning Commission. In September of 2023, the plan contemplated 30 additional luxury lakefront estate homes on a 60-acre parcel. Immediately upstream of Phase 1, the plan referred to the 60-acre parcel as the Upper Meadow. The 60-acre parcel was on the proposed Phase 2 site plan, located directly on top of what was currently the bed of my mill pond. The plan assumed the pond would not exist by 2026. It assumed my dam would be gone. I sat in the records room of the Lemoyne County Clerk's office with my own breath sounding loud in my ears. Cormac said, "Beckett, they are trying to drive you to remove your own dam so they can develop the dewatered pond bed. They never planned to enforce the fines. They were trying to make you cave." I asked him what would happen if I did remove the dam. He looked at me for a long second. He said, "If you remove the dam properly, under a Vermont stream alteration permit, with A&R oversight with full documentation, your liability would be zero. The development downstream, however, would be sitting in a 100-year flood corridor, with no upstream attenuation. The next major storm event would flood Phase 1. He paused. He said, "Beckett, they have given you a $50,000 invitation to do exactly that." I did not answer immediately. I sat with it. Then I said one sentence, "Cormac, let's accept the invitation." I called Thora Westbrook the next morning. Thora had been the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources Dam Safety Program Director for 19 years. She was 61. She and I had worked together on the inspection and certification of 17 historic mill dams across the state. Between 2009 and 2022, she knew the Withington Dam by inventory number, by structural type, by spillway capacity, and by date of last inspection. She owed me precisely 2 favors. For the 2 times I had pulled my Saturday afternoons to help her train new dam inspectors at restoration sites. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for 9 full seconds. She said, "Beckett, are you sure I told her yes?" She told me to expect the Vermont Stream Alteration Permit application packet by courier. That Friday, She told me she would assign it to her most experienced staff engineer, a woman named Tamsin Holyoke, who specialized in heritage dam removals. She told me Tamsin would walk the site with me by the end of the following week. I asked Thora one more question. I asked her what would happen hydrologically to the lower Lamoille tributary downstream of my dam if I removed it. She thought about it for a long minute. She said, Beckett, under a 50-year storm event, the lower tributary would jump its banks at Maple Brook Reserve, southern boundary. Some of the homes built at the lowest elevations would flood, possibly 20 to 30 of them, depending on the storm and the time of year. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table with Neve. I said, Neve, if I take down the dam, 20 to 30 Maple Brook Reserve homes will flood. The next time we get a 50-year storm. She drank her coffee. She thought about it. She said, Beckett, they built their homes in a flood corridor on the assumption that your dam would always be there. They were the ones who lied to the state to get the permit. They were the ones who fined you $50,000 to make the dam disappear. They have spent 4 years pushing you toward this. Are you their conscience? I did not say anything. She poured me a fresh cup. She said, Beckett, take down the dam, do it properly. Do it on the record. Let the state issue the permit. Let nature take the next step. I called Cormac Twombly the next morning and told him to proceed. The Vermont Stream Alteration Permit application packet arrived from A&R by FedEx that Friday. Cormac and I spent 12 hours over the weekend completing it. Thor's staff engineer, Tamsin Holyoke, walked the dam with me on Tuesday morning. She measured the embankment, photographed the spillway, took core samples of the earth structure, and surveyed the upstream pond bathymetry. She submitted her field report Wednesday. The stream alteration permit was approved 6 weeks later on June 14th. With a recommended dam removal schedule of late summer, by the end of June, Lucinda Marbury knew. I do not know how she found out. The A&R permit was a matter of public record. The Lamoille County Clerk's office had been filing it. Probably one of her HOA board members had been checking the records to confirm the lien was proceeding either way. On a Wednesday in late June, Quentin Marbury himself drove up the Withington Mill Road in a black Lexus GX460 and parked in front of my mailbox at 3:15 in the afternoon. He got out. He was 56. Salt and pepper hair polo shirt over chinos. Country club tan. He walked up to my mailbox. He did not come up to the house. He stood at the foot of the driveway. He waited until he saw me on the porch. He called out across the gravel, Beckett, we need to talk. I walked down to the mailbox. I did not invite him onto the property. He said, Beckett, I understand you filed a permit to remove your dam. I have that dam protects my development. I know it does, Quentin. Your hydrology study said so in 2018. I read it last month. His face went the color of wet cement. He stood at the mailbox for a long moment. He looked at the dam. He looked at me. He looked back at the dam. He said, Beckett, I'll buy out the fines. I'll cancel the lien. I'll have Lucinda issue a written retraction. Please don't take down the dam. I looked at him. I said, Quentin, have your wife send me a written retraction of all 4 fines, signed and notarized by close of business Friday. If she does not, the dam comes out on August 15th as scheduled. I turned around. I walked back up the gravel. Lucinda Marbury did not send a retraction. On the morning of July 8th, 3 weeks before the scheduled dam removal, a man named Hobart Twining called me at 7:15 in the morning. Hobart was 67. He had served 2 years on the Maple Brook Reserve HOA board. After moving to Vermont from Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 2022, he had been a regional vice president at an insurance company for 28 years before he retired. He had recently been pushed off the HOA board in a board reshuffle Lucinda had engineered to install loyalists. He had heard from a sympathetic resident that I had filed a permit to remove the dam. He said, Beckett, I think you should know some things. Could I drive up? I told him yes. He arrived at 9. He brought a banker's box and a pot of homemade bean dip. He sat at the kitchen table with Neva and me. He drank a cup of black coffee. He told me everything. The Maple Brook Reserve HOA board had been meeting privately twice a month since the spring of 2023 to discuss what Lucinda referred to as the Withington question. The board had explicitly strategized about how to pressure me to remove the dam. The fines were the chosen instrument. The board had voted 4-2 to assess the fines, knowing they had no statutory authority. Hobart was one of the 2 votes against. The Phase 2 development plan was real and active. Quentin had been working with a Burlington architect to design the 30 lakefront homes that would sit on what was currently my pond bed. The architect's rendering showed luxury homes, priced at $1.8 to $2.3 million each. But the most damning thing Hobart had brought me was a folder of insurance documents. Quentin Marbury had purchased a commercial general liability insurance policy on Maple Brook Reserve, LLC in 2018 that included a specific flood damage exclusion for any flood event caused by removal, breach, or modification of the Withington Mill Pond Dam. The exclusion had been added to the policy at Quentin's specific request and at additional premium. Quentin had known in 2018 that removal of my dam would flood his development. He had paid extra for an insurance policy that would not cover him when it happened. Why, Hobart pulled a second folder. In 2021, Quentin had purchased a separate flood damage insurance policy on the future Phase 2 development through a Bermuda-domiciled captive insurer called Marbury Holdings Risk Limited. The Bermuda policy explicitly covered flood events arising from upstream dam removal and would pay out a guaranteed minimum of $2 million per affected residence in the event of a federally declared flood disaster. Quentin had been planning for the flood. He had been counting on me to remove the dam. He had been counting on the resulting flood. He had been counting on the federal disaster declaration. He had been counting on the Bermuda payout. And he had been counting on using the Bermuda payout to buy out the flooded Phase 1 homeowners at distressed prices and consolidate the property for Phase 2. The flood was the business plan. I sat at the kitchen table for a long minute. Neve said one sentence, Beckett. They were going to do this to their own neighbors. Hobart Twining nodded. He said, Mr. Withington, I would like to testify. Cormac Tumbley took Hobart's files to the Vermont Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. At 9 in the morning the following day, the Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection was a man named Lachlan Quigley. He had been working insurance fraud and real estate fraud at the AG's office for 15 years. Cormac and I sat with him for 3 hours. Lachlan read every page of Hobart's documentation. When he finished, he said one sentence. Mr. Withington, I am going to need every document Hobart Twining can produce, every recording you can lawfully obtain, and a sworn affidavit from your hydrology consultant. The Bermuda captive arrangement is sophisticated insurance fraud. The Vermont fines are conspiracy under color of HOA authority. The combination is a federal RICO case. He told me the AG's office would coordinate with the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, and the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Vermont. He told me a federal indictment was likely within 90 days. He told me one more thing. Mr. Withington, we need the dam removal to proceed on schedule. The dam removal itself is the demonstrative act that proves the conspiracy. We need it documented to evidentiary standards. We need cameras. We need the A&R engineer on site. We need Hobart Twining's affidavit notarized before the removal begins. I told him yes. Thora Westbrook agreed to deploy 2 A&R field engineers to the site for the full 3-day removal process. Tamsin Holyoke would lead. A second engineer named Indigo Cassidy would document the procedural compliance frame by frame. Cormac contracted with a videography firm out of Burlington to set up 4 high-resolution cameras with cellular uplink covering every angle of the removal. Neve called Ardith Beaumont at the Lamiel River Watershed Conservancy. Ardith had been the executive director of the Conservancy for 11 years. She had been advocating for natural stream restoration along the lower Lemuel tributary. Since 2014, she and Neve had served together on a Vermont Maple Syrup and Water Quality Joint Task Force. In 2019, Ardith committed her organization as a project partner. She would manage the post-removal natural stream channel restoration. She would also coordinate with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife on brook trout habitat restoration in the dewatered pond bed. Sigrid Walcott at the Burlington Free Press was the third call. Sigrid was 41. She had won 2 New England Newspaper of the Year awards for investigative reporting. Between 2019 and 2024, she had been covering Lemoyne County for 9 years. She came up to the mill house Friday morning at 10. I gave her everything Hobart had brought. I gave her every A&R document. I gave her every fine letter from Lucinda Marbury. I gave her Quentin's 2018 insurance policy with the dam removal exclusion and his 2021 Bermuda flood policy with the upstream dam removal coverage. She read for 4 hours. She said one sentence. Beckett, I have a front-page story for the Sunday morning edition, the week before your dam removal. Are you ready for that? I told her yes. The story ran on July 20th. The headline was Vermont Developers Bermuda Insurance Suggests. Flood was always the plan. The story was 4,200 words. It named Quentin Marbury, Lucinda Marbury, and Maple.